Hey there, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Hope you're all having a fantastic day. Be sure to let me know where you're from in the chat. I would love to talk with you today a little bit about, we're digging into some Myers-Briggs types, specifically the INFJ personality type. Just want to do some review and digging into some notes that I have, plus looking at a New Yorker article about if the office is a broken place to be. I think there's some interesting things that we can pull out of that while we're digging into some notes today. So if you haven't joined me before on one of these think with me, work with me sessions, be sure to grab a project that you haven't worked on, or you haven't had time to work on, or just grab some notes that you want to go through. Or you can also just hang around and listen to what we're talking about and thinking about here today too. But I'm Justin with Effective Remote Work. If you haven't been on one of these streams before, I like to help remote workers live impactful lives. And not just in the workplace, but anywhere that you live, anywhere that you're doing life, any part of your life. There's a shift happening in the idea of work that it's not just about a job anymore. It's just one part of the bigger picture of your life. But anyway, if you're new here, be sure to say hi in the chat. I would love to hear from you. And we'll get going on some notes in just a couple minutes here. In case you're wondering, the music that's playing is from Harris Heller's Stream Beats. It's fully copyright free so that anybody can use it in streams or YouTube videos and not have the risk of getting hit with a copyright strike, which is a good thing. By the way, if you're joining on Twitter or on LinkedIn, welcome. Be sure to say hi in the chat if you can. Otherwise, just give us a like or a favorite on Twitter, whatever they're called anymore today, because I know I'm not much of a Twitter user. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I've been experimenting with Restream this year, trying to just figure out, does it make sense to broadcast to multiple platforms? I'm considering trying to do these broadcasts on Twitch as well, just because it's a live stream platform. And I know some people are interested in that type of stuff. The type of thing that we're doing here with going through notes, just doing some thinking about some big picture level topics and things of that sort. Again, welcome to the live stream. Let me know where you're from in the chat and we'll get going on some notes in just a minute. And also, if you've been hanging around the channel for a while, I'd love to get your feedback on the type of content that we've been producing lately. I know I've been skewing a little bit more into the remote work world, and I'd love to hear from you if you find that valuable at all, any of the things that we're talking about, or if there's other things you would like to see too. This is an open forum here in a lot of ways today. We'll do some notes first, and if there's especially questions about Obsidian or what we're doing on the channel, remote work, productivity in general, I'd love to talk about them today. Anyway, let's dive in. First, I set up a new camera today. I just wanted to show you the studio. I've got it's kind of my corner over here in our office upstairs bonus room, which is fun. I've got a few different things set up here, but I figured it'd be fun to get another angle that I can share on the streams and potentially in some videos as well. But today, I'm going to take a look at some Myers-Briggs types. I'm starting here in this view on the article because I figured it'd be helpful to have some view into like the big picture of what I'm talking about versus just looking at my highlights from this article. If you're not familiar with Myers-Briggs, it's based kind of on Carl Jung's cognitive functions. And the type that I'm looking at today is the NIFE, or the INFJ in traditional Myers-Briggs terms. NIFE means that you're internally intuitive, processing information, FE means that you're taking in information externally through feeling. So this is kind of the big picture of it. It's kind of a complicated world, but I've been studying it lately because I've been kind of trying to learn more about my own personality, which is an INFJ, and it's kind of helping me learn to think through how I react and respond to the world around me. And I think that's been really helpful, especially when I get overloaded with information. I know one of the things that this article in particular talks about, which we'll get into when I get into the notes, is how INFJs in particular can get into what's called like a loop, where we would go in between the NI function, the internal intuition, and the internal thinking function. And then we kind of skip feeling. And so we get into this loop of overthinking and over processing in our heads. And I've found myself to get stuck in that a few different times lately. So anyway, I'm going to flip over to Obsidian and we can just start looking at some notes. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat. Would love to hear from you in the chat too, if you're interested in chatting with me there. Some of this is pretty personal because I've experienced a lot of this here too, especially lately because there's a lot of big picture things that I have been dealing with in my work world. Trying to spend too much time to hold multiple perspectives and a wide array of details in their mind. Internal overstimulation. Expected. That's definitely something I have experienced recently. So this is something that's interesting, I think, about the INFJ personality type. It can be really overwhelming for INFJs to experience sensory stimuli from the external world. It can be like loud, large amounts of noises, multiple people talking, things that can just generally overwhelm a person's senses. This is also related to the concept of like the highly sensitive person. I haven't read that book too much, and I don't know necessarily if I would qualify in that realm of things for an INFJ, highly sensitive person. But it's something that I know I need to be mindful of, because it's easy for me to want to avoid these kind of sensory experiences. But when I have them in small doses, such as having a good cup of coffee or eating a good meal, listening to my favorite music without any other stimuli, they actually help calm me down and as it says here, relieve stress. And as I know, it's different for every person out there, because there's so many different kinds of personalities and experiences that people have. But I know I've found this to be really helpful in the last year, especially since learning about this trait with the INFJs, because then I can more intentionally utilize it, where I can just say, okay, I'm getting overwhelmed mentally and emotionally. I'm getting overwhelmed sensorily. I need a break from this. I also know that if I spend time exercising regularly, if I can focus on making a good meal and it tastes good, or if I even just, like I mentioned, having a good cup of coffee or listening to some music, it really helps me to let my brain unwind, because I'm focusing more on the here and now versus getting trapped in my own thoughts about big picture things. I've definitely experienced this when I'm not sure how to do something, or I don't know what to do something. If I'm doing something brand new and I don't know exactly how to do it, or if I'm not confident in a path forward, I can freeze up. I definitely experienced that with new fields that I have ventured into, just because I don't have the experience to make a call. And this is the key here, this last part. I'll highlight all of that. How do I do that? No, that's kind of goofy. Highlighting function in Obsidian isn't 100% effective at figuring out how to append highlights together, so I have to figure that out. But this is kind of the key here for me. You can see so many ways of doing the same thing that they struggle to pick one option over the other. That's exactly what I run into a lot of times. I see probably anywhere from 5 to 20 different paths of how to approach something, that it's difficult for me to know what to do. I mean, I can even relate to that here with effective remote work. There are so many different ways that I can approach things, but a lot of times if I just set myself on going in a direction, picking something to do, and then taking time to just invest into it, then as this latter part talks about here, just pick an option, go for it, and then analyze afterwards. So just go forward, make a decision, and then look back, try to make a different decision next time, or even just make an adjustment now, if that makes sense. I think that applies a lot to where we get caught up in productivity or goal setting, or even career choices, things of that sort. It's easy to get caught up in all the choices and the decisions that we have, but one of the best things we can do is just choose. It kind of goes back to the old cliche that you can't steer a parked car. It's true. You can't, unless there's a level of movement, you can't move yourself in a direction. Velocity requires there to be a level of speed with it in addition to direction. And so you have to at least make one step in a direction, and that gives you the ability to start to see here or there. But it's really hard for people who are in this INFJ loop thought process, because it's difficult to see past the decisions that you have to make. That there could be many different good ways to do something, and it could be difficult to pick one. It's true. This is so true for me. There's so much stuff that I find exhausting when I have to pay attention to it. By the way, if you're just joining on the chat or on the stream, be sure to say hi in the chat. I'd love to hear where you're from, what you're thinking about today, what you're working on. We're just kind of here working together on some notes, chatting about some things. And if you want to just hang out and work on something yourself too, feel free to. But anyway, here it is true that when I am forced to deal with very, very practical things for too long, it can be really stressful. I had a season of time where I was doing client work as a freelancer, kind of contracting primarily with one organization. And I was constantly thinking about making sure that I was getting enough hours in to pay the bills. That was extremely stressful. And not everybody has that struggle in that. Some people thrive in that circumstance, but looking at this year, I realized that's probably one of the reasons why I struggled with having to, struggled in that season with feeling pretty stressed out. Anyway, I think that's pretty interesting. If you haven't taken an MBTI test, a Myers-Briggs test, it's not perfect, but 16 personalities. Put it in the chat for everybody if you want to, but 16 personalities has a good free test that you can take. It's not 100% accurate, but it can give you a good starting point on just learning more about what personality type you might tend toward. Now, again, with any kind of personality type, it's more of a preference than it is a set box of who you are. We all kind of have tendencies in directions. And so even with Myers-Briggs, or if you've done a DISC profile, which is about communication preferences, if you've done like StrengthsFinder or anything like that, they're all about preferences. Everybody exhibits usage of different aspects of their personality and these different personality traits at different times in their lives. But we all have a preference on kind of the way that we naturally like to do things. And so for me, it's the INFJ, which is a diplomat here, advocate. Lots of different stuff here. I think this is a good resource to get started on. There's some other really good blogs as well on personality types to kind of dig into the specifics about them and kind of the challenges that some have. Like I mentioned, that article that I was reading from typeinmind.com, it was probably one of the most insightful articles about the INFJ personality type that I had read, solely because it was just like I was reading myself on a sheet of paper. Oh yeah, this is all stuff that I have struggled with, and it was just approaching it in a different way. I've heard like that 16 personalities has a more positive spin on INFJs than a lot of INFJs would actually associate with. So there might be some, variant there. But again, if you're brand new to personality types and things like that, definitely give it a test. It only takes about 10 minutes to do. I find it really, really helpful to understand, not only just for yourself, but how you relate to the world and to other people around you. That's why I really enjoy the DISC test. DISC, I found it, and especially when I was working in the corporate world, to be really, really helpful to understand how other people communicate. I tend more on the stability and the more outgoing side for communicating with people. I'm definitely introverted, but I love working with people. And I also found myself at conflict with people who were much more direct a lot of times. And I didn't understand that until I started digging into that personality type. And so people who are more direct or dominant, the D personality type, I would have conflict with, because they would just be really straightforward with me. And it having that information really helped me understand that it wasn't a problem. It wasn't me. It was just the way that they were choosing to communicate, or that they naturally tended to communicate. And so these types of tools can be really helpful in navigating relationships and how to handle conflicts with people, because a lot of times it's more of a communication preference that's not lining up than it is any sort of like actual personal difficulty, especially in workplaces, so we start to see conflicts like that. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about this, if you have any experience with personality types or anything like that. I'm going to transition over to this article. I'm interested in seeing, okay, this is a Cal Newport article. I've been reading a lot of his stuff on the New Yorker. So, oh, something totally just crashed out there. Interesting. Yeah, I totally lost Obsidian. Not sure what's going on there. Try it again. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Anyway, this article is titled, "Is Going to the Office a Broken Way of Working?" I know Newport is a little, or at least my impression of what he has been, is that he's been a little pessimistic towards remote work. Largely because there's the majority of remote work going on right now is people forced into remote work due to the pandemic, and because people haven't, and companies haven't changed their cultures and how they operate, it's caused some issues, such as 8-hour Zoom days. I just recently did a video over on the YouTube channel talking about this, kind of breaking down deep dive Cal had on his podcast, and just wanted to respond to some thoughts of that, because I think there's some bigger picture items that we can take away from remote work. But anyway, it's a little bit of a digression from this article here. But anyway, I'm going to dig into, got a couple highlights here, and I'm going to look at the actual article too, in case there's anything else that I missed. So when knowledge work became a major economic sector in the 20th century, the necessity to have employees work together around station machinery curtailed. Okay. I think this came up in the last live stream that I did, but I've had this idea that I've been toying around with in my head about work, modern work culture, tending to treat people like factories or cogs in a machine. I mean, it's kind of a trope that gets used all the time, where you're replaceable, you just serve a function in the workplace, and if you moved on, then they'll hire someone immediately. And there's a level of truth to that. But there's also this expectation that comes with that if you're not producing at a high enough level, that you are, I don't know, like if you're not acting like a machine, then there's a problem there. And so there's more of this humanized thinking towards work and jobs and things of that sort that I think is important to keep in mind when thinking about productivity, when thinking about remote work and things of that sort. But let's see here. I do wonder a lot with Newport's writings if he's influenced by primarily being an academic, because the academic mode of thinking is, and an approach to work is a lot different from how most people function in an office setting. There are problems and there are challenges, but I wonder if some of the perspective that he has towards what an ideal work environment would be is influenced by that. this. Chris Hurd. Chris Hurd isn't, if you haven't heard of him, he runs a company that helps remote organizations coordinate logistics around equipment and stuff, I think. But he's also been studying remote work trends and asking people about them. And he's been sharing a lot of interesting stuff in the last couple of years on remote work. If you're interested, follow him on Twitter. He's got a lot of good stuff to say. Hey, Alex, thanks for joining, and thanks for the comment there. I do appreciate that. I try to do the best that I can to put stuff out there that's helpful to people, or at least thoughtful, in the sense that it causes people to think a little differently or think from a different perspective about stuff. So I appreciate that a lot. So I think this is definitely related to leaders eat last right here, solely because that whole book is about building trust. Yeah, not quite. I probably have a lot of highlights to go through in that one. Maybe we'll queue that one up for next week. I'm currently reading a book called The Burnout Epidemic. If you've hung around my podcast or this YouTube channel at all, you might have caught on to the idea that burnout's something that I very much want to help the work world fix, because it's a problem that a lot of people experience due to levels of overwork, but there's a number of factors that I'm learning that contribute to a burnout for employees. One of those is overwork, which I know Newport has identified in a lot of his pieces that he's been writing lately, and I think that's right. But there's also more to it than that, I think, anyway. So it just depends. Depends on the perspective. I'm currently reading that book, so we'll go through the notes of that in a live stream in the future. Probably you could tie the ideas here. Shared empathy is the bedrock of trust. Here we go. We'll make a permanent note today. My note-taking workflow has changed quite a bit. Chris Hurd. All right, so what do we want to say about this here? Grab a full quote. Yes, I don't like how the New Yorker uses umlauts for words like that. I don't know why they do, but I'm not that fancy in my writing. All right, so what do we want to say here? Shared empathy is the bedrock of trust. When we can understand our fellow co-workers or community members, when we can see from their perspective by getting just a bit closer, that builds trust. I do like this point here. Best way to support these. The problem is that the best way to support these interactions is the belief that signing a long-term lease on an office building you cause your employees or force your employees to use every week. It's been the standard. People like the default option. That's behavioral economics. It's behavioral science. People like the default option. I was just learning earlier today that in Germany, compared to the United States, the pool of donors is so much higher because in the United States, being an organ donor is an opt-in thing, whereas in Germany, it's an opt-out thing. So you get a driver's license or whatever the mechanism is in Germany. You have to opt out of being an organ donor. So that way there's a lot of options for people who need things, need organs and things of that sort. But the point there is that behavioral economics dictates that the default option is what people prefer. Right now, and for the past 70 or more years, the default option in the work world has been have an office. That's how you create shared empathy. Instead, now you have to think about creating shared empathy differently. So, making another permanent note. I didn't really say this earlier, but my note-taking workflow has changed a lot since starting using Readwise a bit more. I'm creating a heck of a lot fewer permanent notes, and instead I'm taking notes more directly in the interface, or right in the outline of highlights from Readwise. But there are some times where it's just nice to have a separate permanent note that you can mix and match and link more easily other places. I don't like to rely too heavily on block level links inside of Obsidian. They're really nice if you want to pull a piece of content out and reference it somewhere else. But I find it a heck of a lot easier to find notes or ideas that if they're pulled out into a specific or a different note. Let's see here. Let's spell this out. Pull this code over. We tend not to like bucking against the grain too. It's also related to this, the adoption curve. That's the Rogers adoption curve. Pull that open. So this is the adoption curve here, and this is where kind of remote work is starting to gain a little bit of momentum. There have been the innovators, the companies like Automatic and Doist and Discourse, even where I work, Basecamp and the like, that have adopted remote work wholly early. What's interesting, though, is that remote work was kind of forced to jump the chasm into the majority here, from early adopters and innovators because of the pandemic. There was growing steam for it, where there were more and more early adopter companies, more and more Silicon Valley startups that were going remote. But now that the pandemic has caused a lot of companies to be remote, and therefore are now realizing, oh, this is actually not a bad thing. Many of them in the early majority are sticking with remote work, and the late majority and the laggards are the ones that are really pushing back to the office and things of that sort. In case you're wondering what jumping the chasm is, there's, let's see here, power curve. No. Somewhere I've got this in here, but I'm not going to search for it right now. But basically, there's this, it's similar to the adoption curve. We'll go back here and I'll demonstrate it, but it's more of a power curve where you have like an exponential curve here instead of this bump. Hey, Pranav. Sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly there, but glad that you're enjoying the Obsidian content. I'm going to be doing a little bit more of it here in the future, just kind of experimenting with some different topics on the channel, because my goal is really to help remote workers live an impactful life. So I'm trying to broaden things out a little bit, but Obsidian, I think, plays a big piece of that, because this whole personal knowledge management bit is one way I think that knowledge workers and remote workers can be effective. So thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. Anyway, on the whole power curve thing, there's a curve here, and then you have kind of this line here. Well, just think of it as this half of the graph. You want to, for some products, or say you think bands or ideas, you can have, you can be in the early adopter phase where you're targeting people who are early adopters to adopt your idea or your product or whatever it is, or you can target to jump into the majority. So jumping the chasm is this idea that you jump from the early adopters and innovators into the majority market. So that's what I mean by talking about remote work having jumped the chasm due to the pandemic. It was kind of forced there because everybody was forced into that experiment, just for the safety of people. About math topics. That I'm not super sure on myself, because I don't do a lot of math stuff these days. Had I used Obsidian in college 10 years ago or more, I would have been probably very into doing that. I know with like LaTeX, there's LaTeX options in there. Let's pull up that. I'll just start a new note. You can use brackets like this or dollar signs. And then I have no idea how to type LaTeX. Yeah, so you can do something like this. I'll just pop it in and see how that works. So if you need to notate equations or things of that sort, you can use this notation. You can also do it single line too, where it's just $2, your equation, and then it does it inline, I think. Pull that off. No, does not do that. Maybe it's just single $sign then. Yep, okay, single $sign. So $2 for the block like this, and then single $signs for inline. That's really honestly the biggest part that I know of with Obsidian and math. That's what I can recommend, is getting familiar with LaTeX. I'm not sure what the best resources there are for learning LaTeX, but that's what I would recommend doing, is something of that sort. Hopefully that you find that helpful. Awesome. Right. Just gonna kind of bum through some of my permanent notes here to see what's going on. I'm gonna relate this to burnout. Also think, let's see here. I'm going to find a screen cap of the Wheel of Life. I actually come back to this one quite a bit. I want to have this available in my vault because I think it's really important. Okay, so just kind of lead you through a thought process here. We talked about this whole idea of working as workers in factory almost, in knowledge work, but this idea too that we're almost treated like employers put money in and get work out of you, but people are much more well-rounded and holistic than that, as you know. Sure, I'll take a look at the breadcrumbs plugin and see if that's something I can do a video on. Thanks for the suggestion, I appreciate that. But one thing that I have noticed is that there's this mindset towards work that work is separate from the rest of life. And I think that's kind of an unhealthy expectation that people have on it. Which is what led me to this permanent note here. We often get sold the idea of work-life balance. Work here and you'll go home to your family at a good time and we won't expect too much, we promise. But this mindset still embraces the idea that work and life are compartmentalized and separate. This is just not true. Work is part of life, but it's only one part of life. It's not the most important thing. That is a point where I think some of us in the productivity world and productivity enthusiasts, productivity thinkers, we get kind of backwards, where we try to do our best at optimizing work to get the most out of our workday, to get the most out of our lives. But we often make life work. We often make work the most important thing. But we have to treat work like part of life instead of the supreme focus for most people. And I think Zig Ziglar's Wheel of Life is a really helpful tool for this. I've talked about it in a talk that I did last year. Just going to link Zig Ziglar here too. But basically, that there's all of these is in different areas of life: career, financial, spiritual, physical, intellectual, family, and social. And that every one of these areas is important. If one area of the wheel of life is flat, then your entire life is flat. So if your career is soaring, but your social life is floundering, then you're not in a good spot. Or if your physical health is great, but your financial health is terrible, it's not really a good thing either. If your spiritual life is flat, but your family life is good, then life's going to be out of balance there. And so I think there's this holistic perspective that's starting to get some traction in terms to work, in terms of work, that I think is really important for us to lay hold of in order to combat burnout. As I've mentioned, burnout is something that I'm really passionate about talking about, because I don't want people to have to experience it, or if they do start experiencing it, that they have tools to be able to navigate it. So anyway, that's why I've kind of linked this note here to the Wheel of Life and to the topic of burnout as well. I'm going to wrap up in just a couple minutes here. So if you have any last questions or anything else you want to talk about on the stream, do let me know. Say hi in the chat. Again, if you're watching on LinkedIn or on Twitter as well, thanks for watching. Do like this live stream as well. It helps people find it, but I guess it's probably not relevant because I'm not listing them on my channel, so maybe ignore that. It does help, but I don't know how much. I've been enjoying being on this stream together with you. I do not have Discord, no, but I do have a community on Discourse. And that's where we primarily do a lot of our hangout stuff is there. Discord for me is a little too fast paced to try to keep up with it, a little too much FOMO going on there. And so as a result, I did have one, but I shut it down, largely because I just couldn't keep up with it. So that's the story there. If you are interested in hanging out with us a little bit more asynchronously, on your own time, at your own leisure, do head over to community.effectiveremotework.com and sign up. Definitely would love to see you there. We're talking about all things remote work and note-taking and productivity. There's a couple different topics over there that you can join in and get started on. But ultimately, just would love to have you come and hang out. I know it's been really fun to see everybody that's joined from YouTube over there and to talk about things. Plus, then you'll also get to keep up with the different things that we're writing on our blog too. Largely a lot of YouTube videos and things related to that. But if you have any comments, you want to share it there, questions that you have, it's a great place to keep them all organized. But yeah, that's been the live stream for today. Again, like I just mentioned, hang out with us in the community at community.effectiveremotework.com if you want to continue some of these discussions asynchronously. Otherwise, if you're not a subscriber on the channel, be sure to subscribe because we're putting out YouTube videos pretty regularly. I would love to hear your ideas too. So if you're watching this after the fact, do let me know in the comments below if there are any YouTube video ideas that you have, any topics that you want to see us cover. We're primarily looking at productivity, remote work, and things of note-taking. But that's going to wrap up the stream for today. Thanks everyone for watching. Again, my name is Justin with Effective Remote Work.